Well, hello, everyone, and welcome to a special edition of The Intelligent Community, the podcast of the Intelligent Community Movement. I'm Zacharilla, a founder of the Intelligent Community Forum. This podcast is brought to you by the members of ICF. To learn more about how your city or company can become a member of the world's tightest network of communities that are prepared successfully and together for the digital age, visit intelligentcommunity.org/members. The Intelligent Community is also supported by ICF's licensed affiliates in Canada and Taiwan. You know, one of the characteristics of the Intelligent Community Forum has been our ability to search out and find brave new thinkers on the future of cities and communities and all of the layers that go into making the places we call home successful. Well, we didn't need to look very far for today's guest. In fact, he's one of the founders of ICF. John G. Jung has been influencing the course of cities literally for over 35 years. His work as an urban planner, head of economic development agencies, and of course, as a founder of our movement, have made him one of the leaders of our future. But during COVID, John took on another role, author. While confined to his community in Canada, like most of us were confined to ours, he churned out several books of fiction. His output was tremendous, 5 works of fiction, all related in one way or another to the topic of community, and several taking place in intelligent communities of the year, including LaGrange, Georgia, and Espoo, Finland. John is also at work on a story about the period just before the fall of the Berlin Wall in 1989. Now, these are not wonky works. They are exciting works of fiction that bring you inside those places where murders, climate disasters, and long trips away from home occur. Great material, and actually, I will make the plug, perfect for a holiday gift. Today, I want to talk to him about one of those books that's really close to my heart. It's titled Black Rock. Here's how chapter 2, titled Goodbye Heidelberg, opens in that book. Very simply, why would someone want to leave home? It's a universal, profound question that the author asks, and in many ways is at the heart of the Intelligent Community philosophy and the work that we do here. But more on that with Canadian author, by way of Germany and Buffalo, John G. Jung. Hey, John, welcome to the Intelligent Community.
Yeah, thanks, Lou. Great to be here, and thanks for having this podcast. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, sure. I mean, this is unusual for me to interview you, but I have to ask, why you're like a show off. You wrote 5 books, and we have to talk to you. When the hell do you sleep? You wrote 5 books. You're doing the ICF thing.
It was COVID. I mean, there was I couldn't watch any more movies. I couldn't watch more Netflix. I tried. I mean, I did. My son and I and my wife and others, we all watched Netflix. But after a while, I got bored with that. And COVID was a long time. People remember that period, right? I mean, from about March 2020 onward till even now, we're still in our homes. And, at night, something happened to me. I just felt like, all these ideas that I had, or all these thoughts, all these remembrances, things that, for all these years, just came out. And it was funny, I read a lot. And as I go from one page to another, hoping to get to the end of a chapter, and I can't put the book down until I get to the end of that chapter. It's the same way as I was writing it. As I was writing, I was wondering, how's this going to end? And I kept writing, and it really was a fantastic period of time for me to be able to do this.
It's amazing to me that you did that, because it also is, again, looking at Black Rock. Here's the book. I'm going to hold it up for people.
I got one too.
Oh, you got one too. All right. So we've got 2 out there, but it's also a legacy book for you. I mean, Black Rock is a work of fiction, and we'll concentrate on that in this discussion. But the character Lucas is obviously autobiographical. Just for those of you who wanted a little bit of a background about that book, Black Rock is a coming of age story about a gang of young kids living in an urban neighborhood in the 50s and 60s in upstate New York, filled with immigrants, generational poverty, families with marginal incomes, where they experience what people experience then: violence, racism, threats to life and limb, but also the best time of their lives. That contradiction of that period. The concept of living on the wrong side of the tracks was never a concept that the kids felt, but it's obviously, John, something that you experienced, having been, I think, a displaced person from Germany, and then coming first to the United States, to Buffalo. And that was December 12th, 1954 in the book. And you say, or the author says, snow was everywhere in Buffalo, New York. But there was a whole lot of adventure in between. As you took that journey, how much of it is, in your view, recollected now in sort of, I wouldn't say tranquility, but in a way where it all seems to come together now, and you understand your life and community better as a result of that?
Well, it's really funny for me. Lucas epitomizes a bit of what I went through, but of course this is fiction, so there's much more to the character of Lucas and his family that they went through than what I went through. But there were other things that I went through that aren't really in the book. So it really is fiction, but fiction writers are only good if they have experienced or seen things that are in fact out there, and it truly is a reflection of that period. I did arrive in Buffalo in the snow. Everything was new. The language was new. Things that were in the house were new. Everything from television to Miami shells that I'd never seen before from Florida. The food that I was eating for the first time, what is this that I'm eating? I mean, a banana, for God's sakes, and
Yes.
oranges. But the idea of arriving in cold weather, there was cold in Germany, as I remember, and don't forget, I'm reflecting this as a 4-year-old.
Right.
But the amount of snow, look, right now they're having a huge snowstorm in south of Buffalo, 6 feet of snow. Well, there wasn't 6 feet, but there was 2 or 3 feet. And that was incredible. What the family went through to learn the language, to become part of that community, was both a struggle, but also, an awareness of building themselves up as a family in that context. The people who were in that community were both welcoming, but they were also quite disarming. They were cruel in many cases, and the competition for housing and for jobs was extreme. And consequently, we were called names that the parents used, of course, and then the kids picked it up and they became bullies and, beat you up or called you, nasty names in school. But it wasn't until a different element came into the community that it really became dangerous. And the community turned, but it also turned to something else at the end, a sense of empathy, a sense of
Yeah.
realization that as a community, they had to really work together to keep the values of what that community was all about. And we were too similar to those people who were in that community. So we didn't really stand out as much. We were competition, but we didn't stand out as much. But when a couple of Black families came in, potentially blockbusting in that period of time, not that they were doing it, but that was what the sense of the real estate community was like at that time. It got dangerous.
Explain to people who may not know about that time in the 50s and 60s in the United States in particular, what blockbusting was, because we experienced it in my hometown as well with the Italian American community, which was part of my ancestry. What was blockbusting? How
Well,
would you
so
describe that?
yeah, so real estate, it was a real estate scheme basically to acquire properties cheaply. Um, One black family was all that you needed to do to get into a community to begin to instill fear in the neighbors. They would be encouraged to leave, to sell their homes, to move away because one black family was going to bring another black family, and sooner or later, all of the properties were going to just uh, lose their value, or they were going to become a neighborhood of despair and just uh, really difficult times for people to live in. So people moved. And this was beginning to take place in Black Rock, but it never really did take place. It's still very much a white um, European settled community today.
And that when we talk about the fictional Black Rock, it's the area around Buffalo, those towns, steel towns, as I recall. I had actually family that lived in Tonawanda and those places.
Well, Buffalo and Black Rock back in the 1800s actually competed for the Erie Canal.
That's right. That's right.
And at that time, Black Rock was seen as a wealthy community because they attracted a lot of big companies, Pratt Lambert, painting and warehousing and other kinds of companies that needed a lot of rail. And the rail came over from Canada, looped around Black Rock, and then went back over back to Canada through Niagara Falls. And so it kind of created this enclave. And for many years, the rail became a problem for people moving back and forth across the rail. So that became an isolated community. When they didn't win the Erie Canal, Buffalo became a stronger community and basically absorbed them. But that area became a place where a lot of people were sent, partly because they were poor, but also because they had a language barrier. Eastern Europeans, Germans, Hungarians, Poles, they settled in that area.
Yeah. These are displaced people now, right? Your family was a displaced family from Germany, which means you didn't actually even land on Ellis Island, right? You would go to a different place.
Well, Ellis Island, that stopped, I think, a year or two before. Even though our family has our names on a rock in Ellis Island,
So do we.
we actually went to a pier on the, I think, the Hudson side of the river. The community that we came from, when we got onto a boat, they called us BPs. That was one of the vulgarisms or names that kids used to call people like me at that time. That was a clean version of some of the other things that they would call you. But displaced persons was a real thing, and the BP boat that we went on, was a significant vessel that brought a lot of people over to the United States to work in the steel companies and so forth. In Canada, they also had that activity going through Montreal, but they tended to go more to the agricultural fields out in the West and that sort of thing.
Yeah, and it was interesting as I was reading the book. You get off the boat, long trip, 10-day trip, rough seas. Your mom is a saint. I mean, everybody's puking on the ship. I mean, you really describe it in wonderfully, as wonderfully as you can describe puke, I guess. But you get here and you go through New York, and then you have to get on a train and go the length of New York State. Now, for those of you, again, listening in other parts of the country or the world, New York State is really a big, big state. We've got two mountain ranges, right? A series of lakes. I mean, it is a big, big place. It's larger than I think most of the countries in the world. And so you're going through there. You actually go past my hometown, Lyons, New York, where all the immigrants are working on the railroad and having similar experiences. And then you get to Buffalo, and then or Black Rock, and then things start to take their shape. I found two things really interesting, John, in that account. One is, you've always been this I would say cheery optimist. You've always had this sense. It's very American, actually, and you write in the book about how people just sounded bright when you got off the boat. They were lighter. They were happier. There was a different vibe than you had left behind. That was something you picked up and wrote about, and it seems to have influenced your character, your actual character. And then, of course, there was the brain drain and gain experience that you had after that. Talk to me about both of those things, how you were influenced to the extent where you've become the type of personality that you've become. Because again, being a displaced person can go a lot of different ways. But for you, it went to the highest pinnacles of success in North
Well,
America.
It's there are a lot of immigrants, particularly if you've noticed Indian and Chinese immigrants. There's a sense that you have to do better. The parents put pressure on the children, and those first generation children, they do quite well going forward. And I recall in my class, the kids who were immigrants did so much better because they wanted to get out. They wanted to do better. Their parents put pressure on them to do better. I don't think mine did, but I saw models. I saw models in other people, and I thought, gee, I'd love to be able to go to university. Nobody went to university, but my older brother did. And so he became a model for me. The idea of wanting to get out of Black Rock, well, at the time, I knew no better. I thought this was the greatest place. Hey, what did I know? But all of a sudden, I was introduced to a new high school called Hutch Tech. And I did things in Hutch Tech that I excelled and was able to then take it to the next level. And wherever I went, I always seemed to feel that I needed to move forward and do different and more interesting things that meant something. I always felt that I needed to be relevant
Yeah.
and understand what's going on and not be an authority, but be someone that could help to make things change. And so I did take on that role very young. I became head of organizations in my 20s and 30s and so forth. And the idea of developing these talents, I'd been involved with startups and so forth. The idea of developing talent and creating an opportunity for that talent to seek its best level and its best location to where it was going to do the most, I think is important. And I say in the book, here are all these kids who went beyond and did things. And at the end, there's sort of an encapsulation of what this K-PAC, this kindergarten group, did, where they eventually wound up. As you saw, that there were some that didn't go very far. There were probably reasons for that, and they stayed in the community and languished. But the majority of them left, and they went on to other places. But that's not to say that Black Rock didn't try. They had a unique ski facility. This is true, called Ski Deck, that took over from the Riverside Theater. And Buffalo, for some reason, had a huge number of people who went skiing. And so ski deck was a place to teach you to ski. You know, it was basically a rug that moved, and they had different levels, and you had these skis and whatnot that worked on the rugs.
Right.
They're all over the world now.
Hmm.
But it failed in Black Rock. But that's where it started.
Yeah.
Um,
It failed in the snow belt. Yeah. It's, yeah, well, that's why we try to improve communities. They say there's that old joke that because again, I grew up in the Finger Lakes, which is similar in weather as well. But they say there are two seasons here: winter and the Fourth of July. I don't know if they said that in Black Rock, but these were great places to grow up, and you really develop that in its complexity, and I honor that. But you do talk about the dissolution of the community, and again, you give it the nuances and the complexities because you talk about how people like yourself pursued education, pursued what we would call the American dream, and were able to achieve at very high levels. Now, you write a lot about community. You do that in all of your books, of course. And I referred to a couple where you actually write about intelligent communities as part of the characters. Um, and you grew to love cities. You became a designer, a planner. You really started to understand much broader than the narrow community you were in, the nature of community, how it was designed, how it could be made better. I mean, you took your talents obviously out into the world, then up to Toronto, and now through ICF, you've carried it out everywhere, right? We talk to everyone about how you make your place better. Connect some dots for me. Have you ever done sort of the self psychoanalysis where you say, I've got a lot of these experiences out now in fiction in my book. It's coming, as you say, it just pours out of my soul now for whatever reason. The time is right. Have you ever connected the dots between those experiences, coming out of Germany, going through New York State, and then up into Canada, and the work that you ended up doing in urban design, planning, economic development? Is there a connecting point that you can identify?
well, I mean, the um, the first time that I went from urban planning into a sort of economic development role was when I worked for an organization that I was seconded to from the city of Toronto called the Toronto Harbor Commissioners. And they opened my eyes because they sent me through the World Trade Centers Association and then this other group that I joined that predates ICF called the World Teleport Association, which still exists, and you guys in New York are still involved in. And
Yeah. That's
when
that's
I
where we
joined
met.
that,
Yeah,
well, yeah, in fact, I predate you guys there because I was on the board of the World Teleport Association
that's right.
for many years before we met, and uh, it took me all around the world, and I was able to see these amazing things or ideas that were taking place around the world related to communications. And up until then, it was still very much in my mind traditional planning and urban development. And I really didn't understand at the time the whole cycle of economic development and how it all kind of came together until that moment.
Hmm.
And I think it was when I became actively involved in the World Trade Centers movement and the
Right.
World Teleport movement and the development of these teleports around the world that I had this epiphany that said, what happens if you can bring all of this communication that's being developed in these satellite connected environments to the citizens of each of the communities?
Yeah.
And when in the 1980s, when I started to work with the Harbor Commission, we actually talked about smart cities because we were looking at developing the Toronto waterfront, and I envisaged it as a smart city. And that moment, I started writing things. I think you probably read some of my earliest stuff and sort of criticized it for, you should do more of this and more of that. And I was very happy that you did. But I
Good.
got a lot of stuff published, and people started to say, hey, we'd like to learn more. So for whatever reason, I mortgaged my house and held a
Yeah.
conference called Smart 95, which
Remember
became
that
the
one? Yeah.
first global conference on smart cities, talking about smart people, smart communications, and now smart cities. And people, it resonated with people, and we evolved it from a smart city conversation to more than just a technology piece. It evolved discussions around education, innovation, and now the factors that we have came out of that. And Robert Bell, one of the other founders, he kind of pulled it together in the first book on developing an intelligent community from some of those early conversations after Smart 95. And by the way, that took place in 1995.
95. Yeah. That
And
was
we're
amazing.
coming up to 2025. So maybe we'll be able to host the next Intelligent Community Forums Summit in 2025 back in Toronto. That would be
Well,
fantastic.
yeah, well, that's the plan, right? We'd love to do that, but just to stay with that, that's that event, which we had no idea how it was going to turn out. We had
Yeah,
no
you were
idea.
there.
Oh yeah, sure. We brought the World Teleport
That's
Association
right. It was a
folks up there.
World Teleport Association event, but we turned it around and called it Smart 95 and talked about all the things that communications that World Teleport Association did with its satellites. But
Yeah,
we turned it around and said, how can we make this an urban planning and economic development conversation? So that
exactly.
was
And
that first moment when, for me, that is the key point of connecting the dots.
well, that concludes part one of our conversation with John Jung. We'll be back in 2 weeks for part two of our conversation with him when we talk about Dublin, Ohio, and urban design and a lot of other topics related to how cities continue to improve. You can find BlackRock and his other books at Amazon.com. We encourage you to do that. Great holiday present. And you can stay in touch with the Intelligent Community Forum and learn about our method for helping cities thrive by following us on Facebook and Twitter at New Communities. Subscribe and get a podcast every 2 weeks at intelligentcommunity.org. The ICF 2023 Summit is scheduled for New York on October 25th and 26th in 2023. We hope to see you there, where you can meet communities like Dublin, Ohio, and Eindhoven and Bindong in Vietnam, and many others. New nomination forms for ICF's Intelligent Community of the Year Awards, which are announced at the summit in New York, are now available at the ICF website at intelligentcommunity.org/questionnaire. You really want to try that because you can compare yourself against 200 other communities that are achieving at a very high level, take a self-test, and as we say at ICF, it's all about continuous improvement. You can do it. For the Intelligent Community Podcast and our producer, Matt Owen, I'm Lou Zacharilla, reminding you that there really is no place like home. Take care, everybody.